Family is the most important thing in this life.
I don't want to hurt you. Do you understand?
I need your help with something.
Jesus out there don't play by the rules in here, son. There are no rules out there. There's a couple things you need to understand. Everything I do to protect that boy. Smile.
You don't have to be afraid of us.
Just let me go.
Mother thinks you'll be here a while.
Delighted to welcome on the show today the director of Daughter, Corey Deshon. Hi Corey, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for coming on, talk about your movie, and congratulations on it. I really enjoyed it. Just really to start off, what was your kind of inspiration behind Daughter? But for me, watching it, I felt that it feels like there's maybe something like It Comes at Night or even 10 Cloverfield Lane. There's sort of elements and feelings of that. Is that something that was a reference point for you?
A little bit of both, yeah. I mean, I described the film early on, maybe even before I wrote it and sent it out to producers, as this sort of a mashup of Dogtooth and 10 Cloverfield Lane in terms of what I was thinking of. But I would add It Comes at Night onto that list as well, just in terms of just minimalist, drama-based thriller films. Like, what can you do with limited locations, things like that? And how could I find something that was unique in that space when there were a lot of, really well-done films in that genre already?
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely has that feel, as you're saying, the minimalist and the kind of unknown which is out there. So did you write this mid-pandemic kind of time, or was it written before then?
This was before. So I actually conceived of the film in June of 2019, I think, or June is when I wrote the script. So I think between April and May-ish, I was figuring out what it was, wrote it in June and July, and we filmed in October. I think wrapped maybe the first week in November. Okay. So we were in post when we realized that we'd kind of accidentally predicted a global pandemic and lockdowns and everything. Yeah. Not really intended to be a COVID film.
No, that's interesting. So you managed to avoid did you avoid all the restrictions during filming and things like that then? There wasn't any placed on you?
Oh, from COVID, no. Because we were already well done with production by the time that all came. But what COVID did impact was what we had planned to do for post-production. Yeah, so our plan from the beginning was always to crowdfund for post. And so we ended up launching our crowdfund campaign in 3 days or something after LA locked down and 10 million people lose their jobs. So we're like, oh, we're the assholes asking for money to make a little film right now. But fortunately, I think the community did rally together behind us and we were able to finish it. But then everything at that point took, what would have taken 1 month maybe took 6 on that schedule, where we originally thought we were going to finish the film by the fall of 2020. We ended up being in post until summer 21. And I think even there were still a couple of lingering things into 2022 to get the final version of the film done. And just everything at that point backed up.
Yeah. So it's been a kind of long wait for the release and everything for you. And how's it felt getting it out there and having fairly mostly positive reactions to it? As I said, I was a fan of the film, really enjoyed it. How's it felt getting that kind of feedback for it?
It's great, and it's been really surprising. I mean, this is not the kind of film you'd make thinking it's going to be a crowd pleaser. That a lot of people would be into it. Just with the slow pacing and everything, it's not really something that a lot of people go for these days anymore. So it's been really, really cool to see how positive the response has been. Yeah. And I think it's been a nice, relief that it's finally out in the world, because for a while, we didn't really know what was going to happen. We had a certain plan on how we were going to be able to sell the film, even in foreign territories and things like that going in, and COVID changed all of that. So it's been really cool to finally get out in the world and see that people are actually liking this, weird little experiment of ours. Yeah,
great. And was there a worry possibly on before release? Obviously, because you say it wasn't intended as a COVID movie, but there is a feel for that because of the isolation that's involved in it. Was there worry bringing that out, maybe that people wouldn't be ready for it, maybe, or that it might kind of spark a bit of negativity?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and to be honest, I think it might have even impacted our festival run a little bit, because we were trying, even with work in progress cuts before we had everything finished, we were trying to get into festivals. And I think it was not that anybody ever confirmed this, but that idea that people were kind of sick of COVID films already after the first couple that came out right away. Like, people don't really want to watch being locked down in their homes while they're still locked down in their homes. Mm-hmm. And there was a little bit of a worry that we wouldn't be able to distance ourselves from that, from being called a COVID film or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think, fortunately, the original intent for the film was never to play too much into, what this mysterious sickness was outside or anything like that. It was really just the excuse to be, micro budget, locked in one location. Everything else was going to be, going on inside the house. Mm-hmm. So I think we lucked out there. But it's been nice to see. I mean, I think some people still do mistake it for that. They'll say, oh, it's something that was made in COVID or whatever, or in response to that. But for the most part, and I think our publicists, when they were sending out info about it, were clear about it was shot before. But I think we've been able to, thankfully survive that. Yeah,
as you said, it's been a really great response, and people have responded well to it. The film's shot in 16mm, is that right?
Yeah, Super 16.
So was that a creative choice? Just because it gives it almost like the best way to describe it is maybe if you watch something like Texas Chainsaw and it's got that, it almost makes it feel suffocating and warm at times, I think, with the 16mm film over it. Was that something intentional?
Yeah, definitely. I knew going in we were going to shoot on film. It was a big part of the creative design, budgeting, and the idea that from day one, I wanted to make something that looked like it was made in a past decade. That not necessarily nostalgic for another era, but actually a product of another era. That it could have been something that was just uncovered, recently, some buried film in a time capsule somewhere. And with that, even I wanted to limit us to the types of mistakes that would have been made in a film back then. So even on shooting on Super 16, we weren't using the modern film cameras. We were using a generation past, the RES R3s, which were like from 1992. We were on older camera tech intentionally, and really just wanted to see like how that would play into the aesthetic of the film. Like knowing that knowing that in a micro budget film and a rush schedule, there's going to be mistakes, and so like I wanted those mistakes. So like even like the light leaks, the pops, the scratches on the film, none of that stuff we added in post. There were a couple of shots where like a big giant light scratch flashes on the image, and that wasn't a creative choice necessarily. That was us running out of film in the magazine on that shot, and that's where the shot cut. And so, and I wanted stuff like that to be part of it, to be part of the language of the film, and really played into that with the lighting design too, the production design. I'm someone who I like to see texture in a frame in general, and I like the way film accentuates texture. And so all of that was a way to make the most out of what we didn't have in a way.
Yeah. And as you're saying as well, with the language and feel of the film, the score really adds to that as well. It's quite unsettling and almost erratic. It's punchy and it kind of chops in and out, and there's not like certainly what you would say as a classic melody. It's all like strings and really punchy, as I said, I think, and that really definitely adds to it a lot and adds to the unease I think you feel throughout the whole thing.
Yeah. So the score almost, I would say like 95% of every sound in the film, including like some of the room tone, ambient stuff, is all made by our composer, David Struther, with an electric violin. And we would just, one track, one sound at a time, create these little improvisational pieces based on what was going on in the scene. Like I'd play a scene for him, and our scoring process would just be like myself, David, and our recording engineer, Michael Gale. I'd play a section of the film, give David a little bit of a direction of here's what I'm thinking here, maybe a heavy bass resonance, some kind of tone like that. And David would just, do what he does and lay a track down. He would play into this array of analog guitar pedals that would like loop and modulate the sound. And we would just create pretty much an orchestra out of instruments that don't exist. And one track at a time, he'd lay something down and I'd say, okay, cool. Now when this character comes in and where they turn their head this way, do a little call and response thing with the last track that you did. And that's all part of his musical style anyway. So it was just sort of directing him to do what he does. I would take those tracks and mix them onto the actual edit of the film. Yeah. and arrange what became the final score, trying to keep his improvisational style alive and not have any two pieces of music in the film be exactly the same. So even those little like recurring motifs that we hear, it's still going to be different the next time it's heard in some way. And it just became this living, breathing thing. Like the music is its own character in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really adds to it. I thought it was fantastic. And as I said, there's just there's an air of uncertainty and an air of unease throughout the whole thing. Obviously, Daughter is about a movie about a woman who's been kidnapped and essentially held against her will. So you've got the unease initially, but as I said, the style of film and the score just really gives it a kind of extra layer. I want to talk to you about the cast, and I'll get the Casper Van Dien kind of fan out the way. How was it working with him?
Oh, it was great. Such a lovely person, such a nice person, hard worker on set. He's one of the great like personalities that you want on a set. Because sometimes actors that have had big careers are kind of assholes, that kind of thing. But he's not that at all. He wants to, help with anything he can. He wants to be a mentor to the younger actors. He's been doing this for so long, and he loves it that much. Like he loves that he gets to make movies for a living. Yeah, and so it was a joy to have him.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was great. It's the first time I've seen him in anything for a wee while, for a time. He is fantastic, and he's really menacing. I obviously known him from one of the best sci-fi movies, certainly of the 90s, possibly of ever, in Starship Troopers, where he plays the chisel-jawed hero, and having him as this just intense, his stare and the look in his eyes and the kind of accentuation he gets with his eyebrows is just fantastic. And yeah, he really kind of nailed it. The rest of your cast as well are fantastic. Obviously, you get Elyse Dinh, his mother, Vivien Ngo, his sister, and Ian Alexander, his brother. How was their kind of working relationship, obviously, on set, having such a small cast? Must have been... Was it familial? Was it like a family together the way they were?
Yeah, very much so. So I wrote the film specifically for Vivien, Ian, and Elyse. So I knew that they were going to be a part of it from day one. The original idea to even go and make this film in the first place began with Vivien and myself. We'd already known each other for years, and just talking about similarities that I had in my career, trying to break in as a director, as a writer, her as an actress, and the kind of boxes that the film industry wants to put us in. And, just coming to the conclusion that we've got to if we want to be perceived by the industry a certain type of way, like that's sort of on us to do. We've got to go out there and make something that is our own, that allows us to express ourselves the way we want to. And Vivien was already kicking around an idea of writing a film where she would play a family with Elyse and Ian. And I think she ultimately decided she wanted to do something different. And so I inherited that idea, like, I can kind of see this. Like, this would be interesting. And I was already familiar. I'd met Elyse at least once or twice before. I met Ian already a few times and was already familiar with Ian's work from the OA. So I was thinking, okay, like I kind of see what I could do with them, like what their strengths are as actors and how we could push them in really interesting ways. And I took that and went off and wrote Daughter, like knowing it was going to be a micro budget. So knowing we'd have to be contained to one location and things like that. And wanting to push the boundaries of creativity, I guess, within a confined space like that, and took the script back to them, and they were all on board, and it just sort of started from there. So fortunately, we were able to go on to that set already, already a little bit of a family unit, and Casper came into that maybe a few weeks before we started shooting. I want to say is when we got the sign on from him, and we did a quick little like meet with him and a read through, and then he went off to shoot something else first before coming back to our set. So he was still, kind of the outsider of the group at that point. But I think it worked well in the performances. Yeah.
Well, taking that into account, that probably, as you're saying, would have helped because he is the antagonist of this movie. As we talked earlier on about his kind of real intensity that he's got in it. Just looking at the movie's title, as Daughter, which is the way that Casper's character engages with Vivien. Is it more a kind of take on that it obviously the kind of patriarchal side of it. It's not sister, for example, or well, obviously sister. Was that a kind of intentional thing to do, where it's because it's in such a sort of forced situation because of father's motives in the way you look at it?
Yeah, because in this sense, father is very much in control of the narrative of the house. Like he assigns the names and things like that. So it was keeping that in mind and playing with the idea that once an audience realizes what's going on here, that it's less about the character daughter than it is just the role in the family daughter.
Yeah, and the father obviously as well uses scripture in a way that is warped really to kind of suit his own agenda. That he seems to have almost hypnotized brother and the son by regaling him with tales that the son feels that he has made up, but he's just embellishing scripture. And it gives a sort of religious, maybe fundamentalism. I don't know if that's the correct phrase to use for it. Was that important for you to get across? Is that something that in the early drafts of the movie as well was quite forward in your planning?
It was. So I knew very early on that I wanted to base Father on the idea of those types of, manipulators who will use, religion for their own purposes. Mm-hmm. And so when I was coming up with what would Father's belief system be, I think a character like that is going to just take whatever he wants from anywhere and manipulate it and change it to suit his own purpose. So there'll be Bible quotes that would be, tweaked a little bit. I try not to take anything verbatim because I didn't want it to come off as targeting Christianity specifically. Okay. But just the idea that this is a person who's going to take religious text, educational text, philosophical text, and warp those meanings to serve his own purpose. And kind of playing off the types of, real life figures who we see do stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It works great. And as you said, it's his sort of controlling mechanism, I think, really certainly for his, or what he calls his son. We won't go into spoilers. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who's not seen it, but it's quite fair to say, an ambiguous ending. There is hints towards a certain act potentially taking place, whether and what's kind of out there in the real world, if you want to call it that. Was that something, again, intentional? You wanted to leave it up to the viewer to have their own opinion on how it would play out once the kind of credits roll?
Yeah, very much so. It's definitely a very ambiguous film, throughout the entire thing leading up to the ending. And that was intentional, and playing with the underlying themes of the film and the underlying inspiration from the ethics of ambiguity from Simone de Beauvoir, the idea that we are just, as human beings, ambiguous creatures. Like it's hard to define a human as one thing or another thing. It's always some middle ground. Like we are both these things. In the book, she talks about the difference in subjectivity and objectivity, and that every person has their own subjective view in the world. They're a subjectivity experiencing the world for themselves, but they're also an object within the subjectivity of other people. Mm-hmm. And you can't be one or the other. You are both. And that is your ambiguous state. And so I thought it would be really interesting to play with that type of idea within the film as well. And to not give definite binary answers on whether it's one thing or another thing, but allow for a moment that maybe both of these things could exist or both of these things are true. Yeah. And that played into, starting to see little pieces of Father's reality manifest in the film as it goes on, what he's doing with the blood and things like that. And and knowing that it will frustrate some people to not say exactly, here's what this is or here's why this is. But that for me was never really the point. The point is you're going to be in this sister's perspective of you're seeing all of these things and you are going to have to live with that tension of not knowing, what the binary answer was. And so when it comes to the end, it's that same thing. It wasn't so much about, what might happen next as it is specifically what's happening in that scene. Mm-hmm. So you have a daughter who enters this family, and what she's essentially presenting to them is choice. Like she's a catalyst that's going to make them all choose whether they're going to double down on their own beliefs or accept, to try to escape this system. And to get, deeper into the book side of things, it's like she's presenting ethics to this system. And you present ethics to a character like Father. He believes he's so powerful that they don't apply to him. So he's just going to continue to be himself. You present ethics to a character like Mother. She believes she's so powerless that there's nothing she can do with them. You present them to Brother, however. Brother is in such a childlike state of his existence that he doesn't even recognize that there is a choice. He's just going about the motions, doing what he's told, living in Father's reality. And so the end of the film wasn't necessarily about which choice Brother ultimately makes, choosing between one or the other. It was the fact that for the first time in the film, Brother recognizes that he has a choice. And that recognition of choice is Brother for the first time realizing that he's actually a human being.
Yeah.
That's it. The end. Yeah. It's never really about what choice he might make next. That is left up to interpretation. And hopefully, for the people that don't hate that kind of thing, they're going to be left with the idea that, or forced to look back on the film, like, what does a product of that sort of environment do? Do they really recognize that this is a choice for themselves that they can make, and do they choose the right thing, or are they so far gone and so far indoctrinated that they're just going to become, continue to be the product of their environment?
It's interesting as well. Obviously, we're not 100% sure how long Brother's been kind of involved in this entrapment, and hasn't. Whether he's been there we don't know how long Father's been carrying this out, how many there's been of Mother, daughter, and Brother, and we don't know the outside world. And as you're saying, that ambiguity just really adds to a level of tension that even in the lead up to the finale, you don't know what way how things are going to play out, which really is. Sometimes I think if you have things maybe like a home invasion horror or something like that, you can maybe guess and have a rough idea, but certainly with Daughter, it kept you guessing until the finale plays out without going into too much spoiler detail. So just the last thing before I'll let you go and I'm sure you've got a busy day ahead. What is your plans moving forward? Is there anything after Daughter that you've got planned, or is it all just now putting your kind of time and effort into the current movie?
Yeah. I've got a few different things going on, so it's been nice to see Daughter released finally. I've been working on mostly TV projects since making the film. So I've been writing on a few cool shows. One of them is called The Night Agent, which will be out on Netflix starting next month, I believe. It's March 23rd. It'll come out. I've just finished working on Power, Book 2 Ghost, like just very different, types of stuff for TV. I've been developing some of my own shows as well. Hopefully, I'll be able to get them on the air. Nice. And then now just targeting feature number 2. Now that Daughter's out in the world, I've got another contained thriller project that I've started to put together, started to get some actors on board. So I'm going to be going out looking for financing on that and hopefully hitting the ball this year.
Excellent. Look forward to it. Corey Deshon, congratulations again on Daughter, and thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's me with joy to know that our family is whole again. Welcome back, Daughter.